Hey there, Golden Bears. I hope you're keeping it classy as always. With that, let us just jump into Module 8.2, the second Red Scare. Kind of sounds like a movie, like a horror movie. And you know what? In some ways, it pretty much was. So let's dive in and find out how this could be kind of a horror movie of American history. Here we have Paul Robeson, someone who is taking a tremendous risk at speaking out against a group of people who hold tremendous power at the time. And this WHO Act committee that will eventually be Joseph McCarthy. And this committee are people that are going around and kind of decrying those who aren't true Americans during that time. And so here's a quote as Paul Robeson stood right in front of them all and said, "The loyalty of the Negro people is not a subject for debate. I challenge the loyalty of the Un-American Activities Committee." And this Paul is a hero, not necessarily to this civil rights movement, but a hero to speaking up against a group of people that level some ugly claims and just use hearsay and rumors to navigate some things against perpetrated against a group of people. So we have a story I'd like to tell, and I call it Snitches. In seventh grade, in middle school, I went to middle school. This shows you the age that I am. We used to have a middle school, a junior high, and then into high school. Middle school was 6th and 7th, and junior high was 8th and 9th, and then high school was 10, 11, and 12. And when you do think about it, that kind of makes better sense because our 9th grade year doesn't even count towards going to college. So by the time you get to 10th grade, everything counts when you're in high school. It's kind of a is symbolic but very physical in terms of moving from one building to the next. But there was an issue that happened in 7th grade that involved me and some friends, and one of it unfortunately involves some materials that shouldn't have been on campus. And so my friend Leroy and I and about, 6 or 7 other guys were just being totally middle school, stupid kids, kind of going along with stuff that we shouldn't have been involved with. And next thing we know, we see the campus narcs coming out and kind of inquiring what we're doing, and they haul a few of us away up to the principal's office. And we're like, dude, what's going on? How did anybody find out? There's only like 10 of us here having this stuff on campus, and come to find out as we get separated, into different offices in the office, and we are in there for a couple of hours as the different counselors and administrative people interview us. Basically, a few of us are found guilty of having some, things that are on campus that we shouldn't have had on campus. And all of us eventually come to recognize that we were talking about this in one of the bathrooms during break. And there was one particular young man, I'll leave his name out of this, that we snitched on all of us. And it was then that we really came to light that snitches get stitches type of thing. That was the running joke. And ever since that point, and since 7th grade, we made sure that this one student, he knew what he had done, and we made it known that he was kind of on the outs ever since that situation. I have no idea if the guy moved out of town. I have no idea whatever became of him, but it was apparent to me that there were folks that we all thought we had on the inside that would kind of always take secrets, so to speak, to the grave with you. And then there were others who certainly had no problem throwing you before the bus if that was the case. And that idea of loyalty at that age meant everything. And that idea of loyalty still, in some ways to me, as long as everybody is safe and sound, is not hurting others, means a lot to me now as a grown adult. But I would have to say, yeah, we were kind of involved with gangs, and gangs, in essence, they are based on this idea of trust and kindred spirit and kind of connection through various things. And so, yeah, I don't want to talk more about this, but you need to recognize that this is kind of the same mindset of what's happening across the landscape of America. There are people that are going to begin turning against each other, whether it is real or unfounded. And because of these stories, real or unfounded, they're going to get themselves in trouble. And this is kind of what we call the second Red Scare. I'll talk about the first Red Scare briefly, but this is the one that becomes the doozy during that time. There's a worksheet that you'll be working on. You definitely want to use some of those hints that I give there for you in terms of completing that worksheet. And so with that, let's dive into our first kind of topic, is that is the loyalty. Notice, we demanded loyalty amongst ourselves, and those who broke our loyalty kind of faced the consequences of that. But what was it like in America? In the first basically Red Scare, it happened during the time of World War I, and you had a lot of emerging and rise of different unions, and within the unions you had many of them championing this communist idea of the rich versus the poor, the working class versus the wealthy, etc. Okay, that makes sense, but if you remember going all the way back to the Palmer raids before World War I, they were labeled as malcontents and problems and brought before jail and served time for this. Another person that was during that time was Eugene Debs, and who was an outspoken critic of the World War I and aspects of how that was handled, and found himself in jail simply because of speaking out. Well, we see at the end of World War II, and with this growing scourge, I guess, if we were, to view it from a democracy type of mind view, this scourge of communism spreading across the world, there emerged on American soil kind of a recognition that we need to root out the bad and the evil. So during Roosevelt's time and the New Deal, our government was allegedly working hard to find out who were these infiltrators in the American way of life. Who are these infiltrators keeping us from growing as a country, getting out of this depression, etc.? And they were there to do this investigation. At the same time, the Smith Act was passed. It basically said that you must not participate in any sort of communist activities, endeavors. I find it very interesting when every teacher, still to this day, when we sign up to become a public school employee, we have to sign a form that says that we will not contribute and participate in communist activities. Now, we can talk about communism, and maybe if we like it or dislike it, but not participate in it. Kind of an interesting real-life application for us. Well, what happened is at the end of World War II, this HUAC committee kept escalating to kind of go on a way to purge America of this threat that we felt was taking over, kind of like an amoeba that was diseased and it was kind of infiltrating the body, like a cancer, but taking over parts of it. The first thing that President Truman does is he recognizes that, under Roosevelt, there might have been infiltrators, and so he creates this federal employee loyalty program where thousands upon thousands of people, of the 2 million workforces, almost all of them were scrutinized, but thousands upon thousands of them were brought in, and some were dismissed. Why? Because they felt like they could be lured in easily as spies. How so? Maybe they were poor, maybe they mismanaged money, maybe they had gambling problems. Some were even discovered to have been having heterosexual relations with outside of their marriage, and they were let go of that. All sorts of things took place that questioned their political beliefs and their personal behavior and found themselves dismissed for this. Often, many of them with no verification if this is true or not. Really a sad and scary time that the federal government had tremendous power over the average citizen. Here you see a political cartoon of different people leading this car, kind of going through New York City, knocking people over, careless and reckless. They're not even on the road. They're going onto the sidewalks, just bowling people over, saying, we're here, looking in front of us and behind of us, and just average Joe person being taken out. And this is the essence of what many people thought of them. Now, this Herblock, this political cartoonist, he took tremendous heat. In fact, they labeled him a communist for coming up with a political cartoon that spoke out against this un-American activities. So you can see the warpedness of what this can convey to anybody who speaks out against it. Therefore, they must be labeled as communists because they're speaking out. The other area that the HUAC committee went after is in the private sector, including Hollywood. They had a list, allegedly, of different actors or directors and screenwriters that were communists themselves, and they felt this communism, if it was infiltrating Hollywood, didn't have influence over millions of Americans who watched it. And so there were about 10 of them, the top, I think the 10 list or something like it was called. And this 10 list were brought before a Senate hearing, and they refused to answer. They refused to say, we're not going to speak into this, incriminate ourselves or incriminate other people. And these essentially 10 people were blacklisted along with numerous others simply because they wouldn't speak out against it. Why? Because they felt what was happening by the HUAC committee was beyond what the Constitution allowed them to do, taking away the rights. Around the same time, Alger Hiss, a State Department official who was there at the Potsdam conference, who was there under Roosevelt's administration, a very high-up official, allegedly had been meeting with a spy. No proof of this was done. In fact, Richard Nixon, who goes on to become a president, who ironically gets himself in trouble and is impeached eventually, he is going on and doing some investigating as a first year, in the Senate. He went and kind of discovered that there was some paperwork there that had come from the State Department that shouldn't have been there at a conspirator's property. Alger Hiss was found guilty of this and sentenced to 5 years. Was there any evidence? No. A lot of it was fabricated, but what did this do? It said in public opinion and confirmed the public opinion that, hey, the Roosevelt administration were weak, Truman's position was weak, and of course, if Alger Hiss is under State Department, how many other thousands of employees are in question? We have communists infiltrating our entire government, and so begin accelerating, this scare. I love this cartoon here that has a man sitting in free speech, one of the 10 there, and then you see the Committee on Un-American Activities giving him the finger pointing and saying, hey, all we want is the truth as we see it, not as you say it or see it or want to speak it. I find that a very appropriate type of thing. Well, as the second Red Scare continues to spiral, think of it as like the fashion police. And if you're not dressed in an appropriate way that I guess is deemed appropriate by whomever that might be, they have the right to come and arrest you and take you to the fashion police jail and say you need to mend your ways because you're just wearing things too weird, too avant-garde, your colors aren't supposed to look that way, etc. So it's just really became an ugly time. And so Truman, during this time, kind of wanted to save face because Truman and Roosevelt were seen as soft on communism because Alger Hiss being arrested and someone allegedly found evidence of it, even though I said it was still kind of fabricated. And he allowed these high-ranking officials to be, brought in to be, found guilty of violating the Smith Act, which again was a line, you can't speak out against the American government and advocate for communist principles. Well, this was questioned by the Supreme Court, called Dennis versus United States, and guess what? Yikes! They actually supported Truman and the Congress during that time, where you had both sides of Congress, the Republicans and the Democrats, really on the same Red Scare. Communism is infiltrating all of America, and what do they say? Supreme Court says if it presents itself as a clear and present danger, that the government is going to be overthrown, we have a right to send them to jail or to send them back to a country where they were. At the same time, there's a couple that have been working on this thing called the Manhattan Project. Hundreds of thousands of people were part of this Manhattan Project. When I say that, that was a privately, what would you call operation, military operation, basically developing the nuclear bomb that America had dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima during World War II. It was about a 4-year project Well, like I said, hundreds of thousands were involved with it. Not all in one location. One would process uranium here, another would process the electrical components, another group of America would process. They had no clue what they were actually building at all these separate places. But somehow they found a couple, the Rosenbergs, that somehow probably gave secrets, passing on atomic secrets to the Soviets. Why? That's the only justification the Americans can have how the Soviets were able to develop a nuclear bomb in a quick enough way. I mean, it took us billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of people and man hours to do it. How were they able to do it in a short period of time? They're sensing maybe they got secrets, and sure enough, there was a loose trail to this couple. Were they guilty? Not guilty? Essentially, they were given the death penalty and died, the first to receive the death penalty before and since on that type of activity. This tells you how the American public was consumed and fearful that any neighbor, any person, if it looked conspicuous, would be considered a spy for Russia during that time. And then to go further to show you how paranoid the American public was about this communism infiltrating America, McCarran, a senator from, I think, Nevada, had basically passed this Internal Security Act that said it was, they can prevent American citizens, if they've been alleged to have this stuff, that during a time of war, they can be sent to to internment camps. Second, they can have their passports taken away. They can do a few other things to them. Truman says, no way, this is an overreach of the Constitution. We saw what happened to the Japanese Americans, which was wrong. Well, they were vetoed over, 2/3 vote by the Senate, and this thing passed as well. So America is on a collision course of crazy. And what is going to add to the collision course of crazy? This guy named Joseph McCarthy. He's going to take that illustration I gave you earlier about fashion to the next level. In fact, the first part of fashion that we might have say the illustration is, hey, this is just colors that don't match or designs that don't work together. Imagine this is the guy that's trying to convince everybody that being naked is the new fashion statement, okay? And if you don't agree with him, he had so much power in a matter of 4 years' time that he could convince the rest of the world how you're not weird. I mean, how you're weird by saying that's not fashion, that's just nakedness, in this kind of illustration that I give to you. Hope that's not too weird and awkward, but you need to recognize that Joseph MacArthur, coming from Wisconsin as a first year, into the Senate, he somehow was able to capture and capitalize on this fear and mongering of how alleged communists had involved themselves in every level of government, okay? And he then somehow mysteriously came up with 202 names. And as he went to meet before the video cameras and meet before his Senate during their caucus meetings, etc., he says, I have 202 names of proven people who are in our State Department that are part of the communist government. He never showed the list. He didn't convey how he got these names. All it did is help build further and further power base of his. And then guess what? Anytime anybody who spoke out against him saying, that's balderdash, where did you get that information? Whose names are those? Guess what he would say? Oh, you must be a communist yourself because you're pushing against the truth of this thing. And come to find out, he had doctored documents, he had doctored photographs, etc., to try and link them when people began questioning some of his evidence that he was offering. And this was a very scary, scary time as to how far he had gone. Ultimately, after 4 years, he finally had his wings clipped. It's so bad that, why? Because he attacked the military, which at that point was a sacred, cow, if you will, that, no way do you attack the military. They're here doing the best thing we can to keep communism from spreading. He basically, said the military was harboring communists. And what did this result on? Public opinion went against him. Eventually he was censored, and he just eventually lost his elections and bowed out from them. Here's Joe there on using the media, and it was very important to see that as this was going to a media sensation, as he was questioned further and further, he had less and less evidence. So Americans on live TV were able to see how little of this story had proven true. I also give to you a thing to go back and watch if you can. If you have time, it's called Good Night and Good Luck, and it's about a guy named Robert Moreau that was kind of like an investigative reporter, and who was speaking out and taking tremendous, risks at speaking out against the Senator Joe McCarthy. Why? Because, he would have been labeled a communist for speaking out for this, but he was presenting just facts as to, these falsities that McCarthy was spreading during that time. And so there were just some interesting times in history here that McCarthy had done in this Red Scare. But it doesn't stop there, in that this McCarthyism kind of continues. It reached the Rosenbergs, it reached, Joe McCarthy. Then it goes to the father of atomic bombs. This guy was there, the leader of the Manhattan Project. This is the guy that himself helped develop the bomb, that although he didn't like the fact of what the bomb was used for, but he recognized that's what got us out of World War II and the eventual defeat of the Japanese. Okay, he was accused of supporting communist ideas and affiliations, and so here you can see at the mass height of this hysteria, Americans were sensing that even Robert Oppenheimer, just because he opposed the use of the H-bomb and its power and its destruction, was seen as a communist when there was nothing evidence of linking it to him. Okay, and so just by way of reminder, recognize that even, from Hollywood to teachers were under jurisdiction and under the microscope, just simply because we might not have fit in or fashionably thing. And basically, to conclude, finally, the Supreme Court has some sense. And there were senators that were passing things that were making it, continue to be illegal to speak out against the government, illegal to speak out against the bad things that they were doing overseas and at home front. This court case, Yates versus United States, basically said this clear and present danger idea is garbage, that Americans should have the opportunity to speak freely because that's a constitutional right that we have. And so thankfully, it didn't take too long for the Supreme Court to right the ship and allow divergence of opinion, and allow Hollywood and other agencies not feel like they're under the scrutiny and risking their life and liberty simply because they're critics of what the government is doing. So in that, just be mindful that because of the growing menace as America viewed communism and the Iron Curtain that was going across Eastern and Western Europe that was dividing them, and a rising growth of nuclear weapons, we see beginning internal paranoia where snitches could be your next door neighbor that will be turning you in with no reason for evidence except to say, well, I see them doing strange things over there, they must be spies. And then knock, 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 there's the FBI asking you, giving you an inquiry, hauling you away to find out if you were actually a spy or not. I don't think I would want to have lived in those days, because you guys know how weird and quirky I am. Can you imagine? I'll probably be the first of the people brought up to court. But so on that, Golden Bears, keep it classy, and we'll be seeing you next time.